as we settle in, just want to plug one more time for you this book or thumb drive that you can find at our table out back that has over 600 recently listed investment, real estate, exclusively listed deals that you may want to take a look at, whether it's other apartment deals, whether you're chasing yield in other states and other product types. Take a look at all these opportunities. Grateful to have all of our panelists with us. As we settle in, what I'll ask them to do is introduce themselves briefly and tell us, so we can get to know them a little bit, a project that they are currently working on. So, Perry, we'll start at the end.
Sure, my name is Perry McClellan. I run the LA region for Greystar. Currently, we're about to deliver first units on our Neptune Marina project. That's 526 units in Marina Del Rey with 174 boat slips. Tom is responsible for the great design. We're excited to start delivering units. It's been a big effort. It took 18 years actually to entitle it. So I did not start the project. I think I was in college at that time. So we can thank J.J. Abrams for that. But I think now we're excited to see it done and excited to move forward.
I'm Ken Lombard, COO of Heritage Grove Properties. We're involved in a number of different projects across the country, but in Southern California, our primary efforts right now are on the first phase of our Santa Monica project, of which the second phase we anticipate a multifamily, whether it's going to be a tower or whether it's going to be up to the current code based on the height restrictions in Santa Monica. I mean, for us, we're a publicly traded REIT. I'd say our multifamily effort has started in a very serious way over the last 12 to 14 months. And we think our portfolio yields approximately 15 to 17,000 units. And so a number of our projects that we're moving forward with, we've got one with Paul up in Redmond that we hope to break ground on by August or September of this year. So first beginning stages for us, but a lot of work for us to do.
I'm Mark Weinstein, president of MGW Investment. I'm a local guy. We have two businesses. One business is a student housing business. We're like the 25th, I think, largest student housing owner and operator across the United States. So we buy both scattered sites and purpose-built type properties at different major universities across the United States. The other business is the local multifamily. We own a lot of stuff in Koreatown. We're doing stuff a lot of stuff in Seattle, all around the city, not in the city itself, north and south. We have a project that's actually closing right now as we speak. And one of the things that we do that's kind of unique is that, even though I said we'd never do it, we buy smaller buildings near other projects we have to try to build scattered sites, to try to build a portfolio based on scattered sites, rather than relying on the few buildings that are 80 or 100 units in LA. We'll buy scattered sites, and so it's a little bit unique for what we're doing right now.
And I'm Luke Berriman, Vice President of Product for Red IQ, stands for Real Estate Data Intelligence. We're a vendor of technology and underwriting and analytics platform that helps our clients do more deals more quickly, more confidently, work through that data, really understand the fundamentals of a deal. Our projects are obviously very different, but some of this exciting stuff that we're working on at the moment is all this data that we're collecting. We're starting to anonymize that and aggregate it and really use it to automate and inform underwriting assumptions in different markets to help accelerate that deal process. So that's exciting things to work with.
Good morning, I'm Paul Keller, and I'm part of the MAC Real Estate Group. We're a private group, basically three platforms: credit, investment, and management. And we're fortunate enough to be involved on both coasts. Our home office is in New York, and we have a large office here in Los Angeles. And I guess the project that's getting a lot of attention right now, there's really two here on the West Coast, a tall building in Seattle, and our next tall building in South Park.
Thank you, gentlemen. We look forward to a lively discussion. As you can see, we've got a very distinguished panel. Let's start with this idea that the market has been so good for so long. It seems like in Southern California, particularly because of this housing shortage, that we've just had a real great rental market in the multifamily business. Is it because of this housing shortage, the growth in jobs and the growth in population and the lack of new available homes and apartment buildings? Is this market indestructible. It almost is starting to feel that way in Southern California. So, Ken, maybe we'll start with you on that one. Your thoughts about sort of the indestructibility of the Southern California market?
You know, I hate to use the word indestructible in any aspect of a real estate conversation, but you know, I think that as long as we stick to the fundamentals, as long as we continue to really pay attention to what's going on around us, the competitiveness of it concerns me a bit, in a sense, as you look at the typical rent, using downtown as an example. You know, where you see, I know it happened in Seattle when you saw a lot of units that were coming on board, where literally your tenancies were, you know, I saw a few tenants coming in with spreadsheets and comparing who had what perks to go along with actually getting a unit. We just need to make sure that we don't get into a situation, maybe too late, where we have a lot of units that are all competing with each other and tenants that are just moving from building to building as a result of the concessions. But all in all, I think as you look at what has a tendency to correct itself, where, you know, folks are smart enough to kind of back off of a project if they see that there's an oversupply coming on at the same time, I think we should be okay.
Terry, any thoughts on that one?
You know, I think that you hit it right at the beginning when you said that we've got such a supply issue. We see it now with homelessness, we see it with rising rents. We're 3.5 million units undersupplied in California, especially in Los Angeles. And so when we think about kind of moving forward, even in LA, the supply of developable land has shrunk because of JJJ. So you know, it's interesting. You would expect as construction costs rise as they have, that you'd be able to make it up in the land value, but you can't because there aren't as many sites because of Measure JJJ. You have to do a zone change or general plan amendment. Then you're going to have to pay prevailing wage now. You're going to have to do more affordable. Because of that, because there aren't that many sites anymore to develop, the land values have remained high, rents have remained high because of the supply issue. So I think that from I think if you could put a deal together, it's still going to make sense.
Can you explain briefly, if you would, Measure JJJ for those in the audience who may not understand?
Yeah, that happened in the year 2017, and it was already difficult in LA, as all the panelists know, to develop. Anyway, I mean, every time we do a project, it's a 5 or a 6 year process. Or in the marina, it's an 18-year process, which is crazy, right? The pyramids took 20 years to build, from what we understand. So yeah. So basically now, if you take a site in LA, like there are certain parts of the zoning code that support multi. So you know, C2, C4, you know, RAS4. I mean, there are a few different parts of the zoning code, and those are mostly along commercial corridors. Incidentally, that's where you have the biggest community opposition because of traffic, right? But if you were to find a site that was right off the corridor, and maybe it had a height limit or you know, some other kind of queue condition, you need to remove that. In years past, you would just process that through and work with the local council office. Now, if you do that, you would actually have to pay prevailing wage, which we have no problem paying prevailing wage as long as the land sellers would lower their land, right? But land sellers aren't interested in lowering their land values. So what that just means is less development again. So it restricts the supply going forward that much more, keeping land values high, keeping construction costs high, rents have stayed high. So, you know, that's been a major issue. And you know, like Kim was talking about downtown got developed because the city made it easy to develop. So that's the kind of appetite that's there for LA. But most areas didn't have that sort of focus because it was too hard to do projects.
Luke, what does the data show that you guys are collecting when you see all the numbers and everything you're doing from the technology side? Do you feel like the Southern California market is indestructible?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm the outsider looking in, right? So I'm looking at the LA market, and you know, you're seeing things like, you know, density politics and a dearth of land and that kind of stuff, and that seems to suggest almost structural, you know, indefinite demand, right? There's got to be opportunity going, you know, on an ongoing basis here. But obviously, as you get closer and closer to the deal, you need to get closer and closer to real data, right? It's that operating data that you ultimately need to get your hands on. You have to crack up that rent roll and look at the fundamentals of the deal, right? And understand, okay, regardless of maybe rents soften and so forth, but that doesn't mean it's gonna be a bad deal, right? I can still get a return on that, I can still meet the expectation of my partners, right? But you really have to understand, okay, if the market does take a turn, can I still operate this, and can I still drive some of the fundamentals in this deal? And that's what we help out with.
Mark, any thoughts on what could derail it? What might slow down the momentum that we've enjoyed for so many years in this local marketplace?
One of it is affordability. I'm concerned that we got to a point where so many people in Los Angeles can't afford the rent. So even though there's a large demand in California for multifamily, even in the projects I have, which are B and C projects in Koreatown, in Hollywood, the Valley, I'm concerned it's great that you get this great rent increases, but it's getting to a point where how are these people, with the wages not going up as much, how are they going to be able to afford the units? And I have a lot of friends who are builders who haven't built anything since JJJ because they think that in combination with the high land cost and how long it takes, they don't want to take the risk. They don't think there's going to be necessarily a 2008, 2009 scenario. They think there might be a slowdown. So what I see is a lot of people not doing some projects because of JJJ. And also just, I was through the last downturn and I always like to look back. And even though, again, I don't think there's going to be some type of crash, I had $100 billion of personal guarantees in 2008, 2009, and luckily I was able to pay all my loans out, but it was not a very fun experience. And so my risk-adjusted return appetite has changed dramatically because of the last cycle.
Right. Paul, you've seen that last cycle, you've seen this cycle, how long it's gone. What are some of your observations on what could derail it and what maybe keeps it so strong?
Well, I think we've clearly hit the pause button. We think we're at an inflection point right now where between residual land values, hard costs being where they are, you can only pull so many rabbits out of the hat. The homes can only get so small. The amenities can only get so great. And at some point in time, the numbers just don't work. I mean, there's a radical disconnect now, especially with tall building development, between the risk and the going in yield. And we're just not, we don't have the stomach for it. So we don't have anything under construction at all on the West Coast right now, nothing.
So how do you make money then?
Well, we have a credit business and we have a portfolio. I mean, we've grown our credit business significantly over the last 3 years. We just crossed $10 billion with our book. So we're very, very pleased with the progress we've made on that. And we're just managing the portfolio, and we are planning projects. We have 5 tall buildings in planning right now nationally, 3 out here and 2 on the East Coast. But it's too tough. It's too tough.
Les Paul's got to make an announcement here. He's got a commitment to me that's going to come up here in August. I'm hoping that comment doesn't apply to what we're doing up there.
Besides your deal.
We've made our deal. We're going forward. That's in Redmond.
With that maybe warning voice, there are still though increasing rents in the marketplace. Are you gentlemen in your projects in Southern California, are you still increasing rents? Is that occurring? Tell me about that. Mark, what about on your B and C stuff?
We definitely have been increasing rents to the extent that we can. We're just getting nervous about it. But a lot of times what our strategy has been is we'll go into a building, an older building, and we'll try to buy tenants out and pay them the money, and then rehab the unit and get the rents up that way. And it's one of the things that you guys are going to hear about rent control later in the conference. But one of the things that I find that kind of scares me, even when you have the legal rights to do certain things in Los Angeles as a landlord, everything has become so pro-tenant. It's just the housing department's always sending you notices. No matter what you're doing, you're being watched. And so there's another force going on that really impacts our ability to do rubs, to raise rents, things like that. It's being watched very carefully by everybody, and tenants are getting educated and getting lawyers, and it's become more difficult, a lot more difficult.
What part of the market are you seeing, any of you, that are opportunities to increase rent? What submarkets Culver City has been mentioned.
Yeah, I think in Culver City, it's interesting, because when we did our first project there, Access Culver City, we delivered in 2017. We started that project, we started construction in 2013. When we started, there was really, I mean, the amenity that we were selling is that across the street from our site, there was a kitchen supply company. So that's the exciting thing that everybody's looking for. Which was great. They had a little cafe, so we used to take people there and you'd get a cup of coffee. We'd say, isn't this great? This is a great market. What happened over time is now Apple Studios is there. Platform went in, the Expo line went through, HBO went in, Amazon went in. So our rents now are over 4,300 on average. So we saw huge growth there. We also have our Cobalt deal down the street. So I think Culver City's been I know some of you guys have talked about developing in Seattle. We have a Seattle group, I don't run that group, but we've seen a lot of growth there. But I think in San Francisco, you've seen multiple pockets like that. But in Southern California, Culver City's been one of those outperformers just because of the transition.
An interesting niche is the super high end, the luxury units, which you've seen a few of those pop out. We're in a pretty unique position as you look at it. We're probably one of the few folks in the room that aren't really looking for deals, because we have a portfolio in front of us that we're trying to execute on. But what we do look for is, because we can't execute on the multifamily side, we look for multifamily developers who can be our partners. But we're really exploring the high end of it to try to see how much room there's left in the various markets that we go in. Opportunity zones potentially present something to us. We don't know what that is yet, but we've got about 40 of our sites that across the country that kind of fit into what is currently defined as an opportunity zone. The inside laugh is Aventura, which if you know the Aventura Mall, that's in an opportunity zone, which happens to be one of our sites. So I'm not sure what the heck Treasury's doing on this thing, but we'll see how that rolls out. But continuing to watch the market, continuing to make sure we watch how everyone else is doing in terms of their rent growth and the various projects that are coming up. It's really what's an important part of our growth strategy.
Well, I was just going to add to that. I mean, we have a lot of that here. A lot of the nervousness in some of what we're talking about here, and it's true that a lot of our clients are slowing down. They're being very, very cautious about what they're doing, but they're also getting very careful and very precise in their analysis. Right? They're looking at the individual floor plan codes and the units, and they're looking very carefully at concessions and vacancies and how those are trending. Right, and that is an element of demand, obviously, at a more micro level that we have to be looking at. And then even those players that are slowing down a little bit, they might not be deploying as much capital, but they're still looking at deals and they're still amassing that data, because there are opportunities out there, and people realize that those opportunities are still out there and want to be prepared to strike when they see that.
I think the other thing too is, when you look around and you think about these various submarkets, and Culver City is a phenomenal example of how content is playing such a major role in the greater Los Angeles area. But again, getting back to the fundamental issue of job growth, median wages, and rent, and if we're not providing a clean and safe environment in all these submarkets, at some point in time the music's going to stop, and people are just going to take into account a number of other things like SALT, and they're going to leave Southern California. And then, maybe we won't have some of the problems we have, but we'll have other problems. So it's a very interesting time.
I think, as was mentioned, you got to be maybe extra precise, right? In this very interesting time, a conservative approach makes sense. Still opportunities out there, but you really need to be even more focused on where you're deploying your capital and what your investment strategy may be. We've touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to go back to rent growth versus wage growth. Can that keep going? Any thoughts on that? Anybody want to dive into that one?
Well, look, everybody in this room is real smart. You look at the top 20 MSAs in the United States. Look at the dynamics within each MSA as it relates to job drivers, how dependent are they on certain industries, etc. Los Angeles is a very, very complicated, dynamic, exciting place. Is it as easy to face capital on an opportunity in Los Angeles as it is in Seattle? No way. I mean, Seattle is just so much more straightforward relative to what's occurred there in the last 10 years as it relates to just absolutely phenomenal 6-digit job growth. And I'm talking about median wage, 6 digits and up, I think, as everybody knows. So it's more complicated here in Los Angeles.
And some of the wage growth isn't the wage growth in the right industries
Right.
or for the right people in Los Angeles, and so that's become very difficult. You know, the other thing you have to realize, besides the rent and wage growth, is operational cost. It's becoming a lot more expensive, whether it be utilities or other factors. A new parcel tax almost passed with EE the other day. So you keep on more and more taxes, more and more expenses. So besides worrying about wage growth and rents, you got to worry about operations, especially when markets change. One of the things that I'm sure everybody in the panel spends a lot of time on is how do we become better operators? Because the only way we can hit our numbers is if we operate better, and we have some things we can't control. And a lot of people are doing things like solar and other things with utilities, LED lighting and things like that to bring down expenses. But that's another key driver, at least in what I do, being able to create value.
So I think that there are two comments that I would make. One would be around this whole idea of affordability. And the affordability is such a big issue right now, not just homeless, right? So it's literally how we're going to figure out ways that the rents can become affordable to folks that frankly are making the type of income that will not allow them to stay in the higher price units. The second part of it is as we look at a real job story, in job growth, and making sure that, and Paul and I have talked about this a lot over the years, but as you single out downtown and you compare it to some of the other cities that we've done business in, and we keep bringing up Seattle, but you've got a significant company that is able to relocate in, say, a downtown. Problem is LA has too many downtowns. So now what we're seeing is that growth in those companies landing along the beach cities, which is helping to spur growth and where the incomes will be able to keep up with what rents will be down there. But downtown, you still have smaller bits and pieces of companies that are committing, but not the big, the giant that we need to come in and really kind of spur the right type of job growth downtown.
Let's talk a little more about downtown. It's been the hot spot the last few years. Still a lot of units on track to be delivered. Is that sustainable? Are those units going to be able to be, survive well, or are those developers going to be okay, Perry?
Well, I think over the long run it's sustainable, right? So I think the absorption, I think they just need to absorb. So if you're delivering right now, that's a little bit of a challenging time. I mean, I somewhat know we have an arts district deal, and we're delivering. It's 320 units across the street from the new headquarters for Warner Music Group. So we're really excited about that. We try to make it very clear that is not South Park. It's so far away. It's like a whole different market. It's like 20 miles away or something. But I think over the long run, it's been great for our community that LA's been so developed and the downtown's filled in. And there's so many great restaurants and great projects, and I think over time you're going to be able to come back. This stuff just needs to absorb. Anybody else opinions on downtown LA?
Well, that's where I kind of got my real start, is in downtown. In 1998, I bought 10 high-rise buildings in downtown and created like a Soho type project. And they had the adaptive reuse ordinance, which made it really easy to do older buildings. And for me, it's kind of like deja vu. I thought that was overbuilding in 2008, 2009. I do think it's different. I do agree with Perry that over time it's going to be fine. But I just kind of feel like there's so much coming on so fast. I see some of the concessions, and I've gotten more conservative. I have a different analysis profile now than I did in 2008, 2009. So to me, it's a little bit too much, but there's definitely the need in downtown over the long run. We need the housing down there. It's just a matter of will it all absorb with the rents they penciled, net rents.
I've always had cautious optimism about downtown, and I continue to put it into that category. In my previous life with McFarland Partners, there are 2 projects that we have coming out on board now, which I think your company's talking to them about. So it's all about timing, and I know the early conversations as you looked at a lot of the announcements, 10,000 plus units coming on board over the next, I think it was 5 to 7 years. The bet was that all those projects won't happen. So if we could ever get our finger on the pulse of what was really going to take place in terms of the market, the hope is that it doesn't feel like 10,000 units. It feels more like maybe a 5 to 7 number, which you feel from an absorption perspective, you can have a reasonable lifetime in terms of how long you can take to absorb those units.
Let's talk about concessions a little bit. Are you giving concessions in the market today? What are they like? Or what are you seeing out there? Paul, any thoughts on concessions?
Yeah, I mean, we're giving concessions, absolutely. I mean, we're leasing up a 540 unit high-rise right now in South Park. It's our second building, and we're confident we've got a good product, but we've got to compete. And I think, we have very patient capital. We have 3 more sites that will eventually build about another 1,500 units on. Again, it gets back to this issue. We've got to have a clean and safe downtown. I mean, you talk to the planning department and they'll tell you they want 20% of all the growth in the city of Los Angeles to occur in the CBD over the next 20 years. I mean, think about that. So that means we're going to see a tremendous amount of density, which we all know is very expensive to develop. So you're looking at rents that are going to be at the top. I mean, it is in Century City, but again, this is expensive stuff. And if we don't have a clean and safe environment, people aren't going to come, and it's going to be tough. So I think a lot of us that are in the room here, I know a lot of us are involved here in the CBD, and I tell everyone all the time, I mean, I think it's so important that we're all involved in really trying to hold elected officials accountable and get involved with various bids, etc., to try to ensure that we're able to maintain a higher quality life, or a quality of life that's commensurate with the rent we're going to have to charge, including the concessions, the effective rent.
That's right. Mark, maybe not on the brand new high-rise, but maybe some of the projects you're working on that are Class B, Class C, are you doing concessions there?
Now, in the LA and Seattle markets, we're not having to do concessions. Where I have concessions, some of my student housing nationally, we often have to, when you're leasing up, you have a window of what you have to do to get full in a building. And some of the schools, ironically, Magic Johnson School, Michigan State, they kind of built a lot. So we're feeling it in a market like that where they overbuilt a little bit, and we have to give concessions. But in Los Angeles, in the B and C, we rarely have to ever give concessions. But I wanted to say one thing about the homelessness issue in the downtown. I urge all of you guys to get involved in that issue, because they're making fun of us on TV now, that LA, poking fun of what we're doing in our downtown, and how a state that's taxed as heavily as us, the city that's taxed so heavily, has such an issue in the homelessness issue. I urge all of you in some way to get involved in it, because I'm getting involved on think tanks and doing different things. We're actually helping place homeless people and getting furniture for them and doing things, because we all have to do our part, because I don't want to be the laughing stock of the United States.
We can't have the Los Angeles Times running full-page editorials on what a national disgrace this is. We can't do it. He's right. This is not sustainable.
This is going to affect everything, the values of your homes and everything. It's going to have a negative impact on everybody. And also, this is your city, and you have to take charge, and you have to make a difference, and you have to let the politicians know they've got to perform. That it's not going on to the next office. It's about what are you going to do now about these problems, and what are the solutions.
Okay, thank you. Ken, would you tell us a little bit about at Seritage? I know you guys have acquired or are working with a lot of old vacant Sears properties. What are you doing with those properties? Is there a multifamily aspect to that? I think a lot of people might find that interesting with maybe the perceived decline of some retail, but what are you doing with some of those?
So the initial acquisition took place about 4 years ago. At the time I was on the board. I was asked by the board to come off a year ago and take on the COO role. But the initial approach was to say we had 266 buildings, which we acquired from Sears, about 3,200 acres, and about 32 million square feet of rentable space. So we had an initial push on the retail side, which involved either a demolition of the Sears building in its entirety. There are times if it was a Sears that was going to continue to operate, it would reduce itself in size. Now with this next round of Sears activity and questions as to whether or not they're going to continue to move forward, how are they going to continue to move forward? Is it a reduced format even beyond what we talked about? It kind of evolves to a point where we are right now. As we look at the real estate as 150,000, in typical, we average about 13 to 15 acres. And what is the highest and best use for that? Whether it's industrial, whether it happens to be apartments, whether it happens to be retail, or even mixed use. And most of the time, we're able to build that type of flexibility with the amount of dirt that we have and the various partnerships. And in some cases, we go beyond that. So I use Westminster as an example where we're working in conjunction with Washington Prime, who owns the mall. The city wants a big project, multifamily. We may join forces with that mall, which is what we essentially did up in Redmond with the land swap that we're working on with Regency and the project that Paul and I are working on. So a lot of work for us to do, really being able to sit in a position and decide what the best use and what's going to create the best experience for the projects that we have, the sites that we have.
Thank you. Gentlemen, let's talk about the Uber effect. So are you thinking about that in your current projects? Is it really, is parking still really important to your tenants, or is it becoming less important? Is that effect a real thing or not? Mark, any thoughts on that one?
Interesting enough, I thought it was going to be a real positive, and I think that for what they're doing, especially this newer stuff, it really should be a positive, as should electric cars. In some of our projects that don't have parking, we actually are having, as we're trying to achieve these higher rents, we are having a little pushback, on that, and we actually give free Uber credits for the month to a lot of tenants. That's the only concession that we have done, is give them like $50 of Uber, $100 of Uber credit sometimes, so we can get that rent that we're asking for. Just at a couple buildings, it's come up, and I don't think we've done it recently, but in phases we do it.
Barry, any thoughts?
We've actually, I think one of the best ways to measure it, and you were talking about how do we actually quantify these things, is that at the beginning of the cycle, we were seeing people were paying big premiums for that second space. And so our parking revenue was actually something that was in our rental premiums, in our pro forma. So we saw it early cycle, we don't see it anymore. Fortunately, rents have gone up, cap rates have stayed low, returns are better than what we thought, but we don't see that anymore. So we've tried to use that to show a decrease in demand and talk with cities about actually having less parking in the code, simply due to the fact that LA really, and we talk with these other guys that develop in other markets, we're really overparked anyway, and so we're talking to cities about lowering the amount of parking required, which is going to help the hard costs, obviously, and help us to continue to build more projects.
So we're not seeing the impact from a tenant perspective, especially on the retail side. There's still tenants that are stepping up and they want, with whatever the parking requirements as they see them today, that's how they're underwriting their projects and the expectations from us. On the multifamily side, I just am cautious about it as you continue to look at the end when it's time to exit it, and what that conversation is going to do with that potential buyer as you look at the parking and what cycle we may be in at that particular time. So I think there's some good parts of it that could potentially happen. I think it's still too early to tell.
One thing I'll say is that a lot of my friends are doing large projects in Culver City, and where they're building their parking in a way that they can convert it later to office or some other use. And so I'm seeing in Hollywood, Hudson, my friend Hudson Properties is doing it, Hackman's doing it in his projects in Culver City. So there's a lot of people that are actually thinking through what the future's gonna look like, and Gensler's the architect on a lot of them, and they're doing some very creative things, thinking that it is gonna have an impact, so they're building it that way.
I was just going to mention that we're seeing that as well. And, you know, just being able to do that analysis, okay, what does it take, at what point in time to convert this, what's it going to cost, right? Being able to compare, right? Also, you know, these units or these communities have parking, these don't, right? What's the benefit to the trade-off, right? Being able to analyze that is so very important.
That idea of building a parking structure that in one day you might be able to convert to an office building or something like that where there's less need for parking. Certainly long-term planning, it'll be interesting to see if that really comes through. One more question and then we'll jump to some of the audience questions. Are interest rates, are we ever gonna see 7%, 8%, 9% interest rates again? Any opinions on that one?
We don't ever want to see them again.
I mean, are we at a new time in just this international economy? Is it a different day and age today where we just won't see those kinds of rates again? Is there maybe too much government control to let that occur?
You know, I think the hesitance you see from everyone up here is whose crystal ball is better than the other, right? I mean, our job is to pay attention to the trends and track what's going on and not get caught in a period of time where there are rates that are not conducive to the work that we have to do to develop these projects. But who knows? I mean, there's so many variables that are controlling whether that goes up or down, and how many tweaks we're going to get on a daily basis as to what the next move is going to be. I mean, it's just so unpredictable.
I mean, I think one of the interesting things, if you look at Ray Dalio, right, the stuff he's written, really we're in a, you know, what we've had to worry about more the last several years is, are we in a deflationary period than an inflationary period, right? And so if you think about deflation, that goes along with low rates, and also deleveraging that hasn't really occurred yet. So I mean, I think there were some bubbles to burst at some point, but I don't think that necessarily leads to high rates.
I think, putting aside black swan events, there was a great article about 4 weeks ago in Bloomberg about, is inflation dead? And it's really a thoughtful article. And I think, to the point that was just made, you know, when you think about technology and globalization, and again, put aside trade wars and black swan things happening, but you could argue that we're going to see low rates for a long time.
A couple questions from the audience. Do you find that you have to compete with senior living / independent living developers for land? I mean, with all the baby boomer population, all the demographic studies showing that, you know, dramatic need for more senior housing. Are you seeing yourselves compete with those kinds of developers?
I mean, we haven't in the core urban markets. I think if you know, Greystar does, you know, some senior housing development. And we've been really successful with that in other parts of the country, you know, like in the Southeast. I think here, if you told somebody, you know, who's 55, hey, you can sell your place and live with all 55-year-olds, a lot of people would be offended. I know some of my neighbors would that have, you know, but I think that I think LA is a little bit of a different market that way. So I haven't seen it in the core markets. The thesis there is you'd be able to sell your house and then pay more, which we haven't necessarily seen there in any of the data we've seen in other markets.
So our perspective is that a business that we want to be in? And so we have been approached by developers that are in that business. And so it's a fundamental decision as to whether or not it's a site we want to sell versus us getting into the business. Now that may change over time, but we don't find ourselves competing with them as much as just making a fundamental decision on what's the best approach from our portfolio perspective.
Another question, in Southern California, what's your average cost to build, price per unit? And what percentage of that is soft cost? I mean, it probably depends on the market, but any thoughts there right now, what you're seeing on an average per unit cost to build?
I think if you tried to build a tall building today in Southern California, it's conceivable it could be close to $600,000 a day. I mean, these are astronomical numbers if you're talking about trying to do rental. I mean, it's just really expensive. Wood, I don't know, type 3 modified is probably, could be in the 4s, low 4s.
Anybody agree, disagree? I agree, those are the numbers. If you go back to when we did our Huntington Beach deal in 2012, that was a type 3, RC worked on that one. That was a type 3 modified deal, and we built that for $215 per square foot. And now you can't even build garden, walk up with non-indoor parking, 3-story at $215 per square foot.
And is that mainly just because construction costs, construction materials,
Construction costs,
labor?
labor, materials, tariffs. We knew there would be tariffs. Supposedly pro business, but yeah.
Well, we'll see, maybe in the next few weeks even, what's gonna happen with some of the tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting what's going on right now when you're buying exterior curtain walls for these tall buildings. No one wants to take the risk on the aluminum. So, I mean, you end up with sort of a cost plus $15 million contract, and no one is willing to tell you ultimately what the wall's gonna cost. It's crazy.
Because they don't know.
Yeah,
because of the
yeah,
tariffs.
because they don't know. Well, and I think he changes it, about every 48 hours?
My Twitter just went up, I think. One more question we'll take from the audience there. It's to Ken's point about affordability. How can you make workforce or work class A minus or B plus new construction work? I mean, we got this workforce housing we need. How do you make that work?
Well, what we found that does not work for us is frankly the guard type of approach from a design perspective. So I think it starts with trying to reconfiguring how and what type of building you're going to build. And we have sites that fit it, and we're trying to figure that out right now. But being able to have enough land to do it from the typical approach that we see nowadays is not going to continue to work. We just can't get that much land. It doesn't pencil out.
What is the solution then for more workforce housing? Anybody, how do we solve that riddle?
Modular is part of it.
Modular is part of it.
One of the things is just building, like they said, prevailing wage and all the different ordinances and things like that make it so expensive to build. And even on the existing stuff, your rentals are really high. I consider myself a workforce housing guy, but I'm still concerning that affordability and wage growth is still a big issue.
It's got to be a mid-rise, no more than a mid-rise, low-rise type of approach versus what we're seeing nowadays.
I want to thank the gentleman for a very lively discussion. Thank you for listening.